In this episode of DevelopSec, we talk about application penetration testing and what you need to know. Tackling the challenge to integrate security into the development process? Looking for insights, answers, and practical solutions to avoid getting overwhelmed? Welcome to DevelopSec Live, where our focus is your success in securing and improving development processes. And here is your host, James Jardine. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of DevelopSec. Today I want to talk a little bit about penetration testing, application penetration testing to be more specific, because this is something that we see all the time. One of our biggest drivers in the security industry is dealing with penetration testing. We've seen this as that kind of golden standard for testing our security of our networks, of our applications, of our Internet of Things devices, whatever it may be. This is kind of that go-to test to say, hey, I want to have an assessment to have verification of how's my app doing or how's my network doing. In our case, we're talking about applications, but how's my application doing from a security perspective? And so because I deal with penetration testing all the time, one of the services that I provide to clients, I thought it would be good to talk about it. We've talked about it in the past over our podcast, and we've talked about what penetration testing is, and I wanted to kind of cover a little bit more of that again. It's been a while, and for anybody that's new to listening, we can start talking a little bit about what it is. If you have any confusion over what penetration testing is, what we're trying to do with it, what are our goals, how do we handle the results to it, this is what I want to focus on a little bit today. Hopefully it won't take too long to cover through it, but I want us to have a good understanding of what it is. And one of the biggest things that a lot of people often think about when they think about penetration testing is they ask the question about penetration test versus vulnerability assessment. Now, it gets kind of confusing, right? Because a lot of times, really what we see is we see penetration tests almost used as vulnerability assessments. And sometimes we see it vice versa, where we see a vulnerability assessment and we see that portrayed as a penetration test. The big difference, really, that we have between penetration test and vulnerability assessment is a penetration test often has different goals, but we take it a step further than what we do with vulnerability assessments, and we actually do exploitation. So with vulnerability assessments and penetration tests, we're walking through and we're going through the application, we're looking for vulnerabilities. We're going to identify certain instances of security weaknesses within your application. But when we get to a penetration test, that's where we take that the next level. This helps us better understand the risk that we have within our applications because we're taking it to that next level. Let's use an example. If I have SQL injection and I find it with a vulnerability assessment, well, I know I have SQL injection. Maybe I had a single quote and it dropped an error message in there. And so, yep, valid enough. I got a SQL error back. We have SQL injection here. We need to go ahead and we need to resolve that. But we don't necessarily understand the risk to what that SQL injection means. There's a lot of things that we could be doing on the back end to help mitigate that SQL injection. Maybe we're running our database as least privilege. Maybe we're limiting down what the user has access to. Maybe we don't provide access directly to the database, but we do everything through views or we do everything through stored procedures. So we're limiting what that attacker could potentially do if they were to exploit that SQL injection. And that's what the penetration test is going to help us understand. Because penetration test, we're going to then take that vulnerability that we've identified and then we're going to try to exploit it. And we're going to see how far we could potentially go with that vulnerability. Some tests I've done in the past, we have the ability to be able to add users onto that database server, the ability to go in and pull all data from the server. I had an assessment I did actually where there was a belief there was no personal information in there, but there were other databases on that server that we had access to because of the way it was configured that we could actually pull sensitive information, right? So we have to make awareness to what we're doing with that. And that's what that penetration test does, is it kind of opens those eyes and says, okay, I've got a SQL injection. How could I use that to be malicious? What can I do with that to attack through? Vulnerability assessment, we don't do that. Vulnerability assessment, we typically come through, we identify a flaw. We may validate to determine if it's a false positive or false negative. But that's about as far as we go. We don't actually go through the exploitation of pilfering through data and, attacking the actual machine or doing anything like that. We've identified we've got a weakness. We kind of stop right there. So that's one of the big differences that we consider when we talk about penetration test versus a vulnerability assessment. Now, I mentioned our goals. Our goals may be a little bit different. When we talk about a vulnerability assessment, our goal is kind of try to identify every possible instance of any type of vulnerability that we can. Most of our vulnerability assessments are done through automated tools, right? You got your SAST, your DAST, all these different options to be able to go through and analyze your application. And some of these tools do a really good job of going through and finding all these different vulnerabilities. Maybe they are great at cross-site scripting and they can go through and find thousands of cross-site scripting flaws within your app. Switch over to a pen test. Oftentimes, I don't think I've ever done a pen test where our goal was to try to identify every instance of a vulnerability. Now, of course, your goals depend on the penetration test you're doing, who your clients are, who you're working with, what they're focusing on doing. But oftentimes, our goal is not to find every instance of a vulnerability. Often our goals in a penetration test are a little bit more tighter, right? They're more focused. They're looking at things around, hey, can you gain access to PCI data? If you look at it from a network side, it's always, can you get domain admin? From an application side, it's, hey, can you gain access to certain data? Can you view data from other users' accounts? But there's all kinds of different goals that we put in play that we're trying to do. But then on top of that, we're also doing a vulnerability assessment of sorts where we're saying, okay, I'm going to go through the app and pretty much any weakness I can identify, I want to go ahead and grab that. I'm going to put it in the report for you. So maybe you've got response headers that have sensitive information, not a super high finding, but we're going to list that out, right? We're trying to list out the vulnerabilities that we're seeing within your application, the security weaknesses that exist, so you have them so you can come back and you can address them. So that's what we're looking at when we're thinking of our goals. Our goals are a little bit different, but we want to understand what our goals are when we have a penetration test performed. Because when we go out there and we pay all this money to have somebody pen test our apps, we want to understand what we're getting, right? And we want to understand what we're looking for. Why do we do pen tests? Oftentimes because clients force us to. Other times, regulators force us to, right? There's lots of different reasons why we do it, but it comes down to the fact that we have to do it in most cases. So let's make sure that we're getting what we expect out of this pen test versus just doing a test because you're checking a box. You want to have somebody come in, they assess the app, they give you a report, you send it off to a developer, they fix some things, and off you go. Yep, I did a pen test, I'm good to go. I feel good about it. We want to make sure we understand why we're doing it, and we want to understand how we can get out of it some more stuff. So one of the things I like to talk about with people is how about getting prepared when we're getting ready to do a pen test? There's actually a lot that goes into doing a pen test. It's kind of interesting. I mean, when I do a pen test for an organization, there's not a lot of preparation before the test from my side. I don't need a whole lot to be able to do a pen test. The goal of the pen test is I want to come at the application like an attacker would. So oftentimes I don't have a lot of information about the application. I don't have to do deep dives ahead of time. We don't have to have all these meetings to understand how the app works. Now, if you've got an app that is, very particular, very niche, if you will, then maybe there has to be some dedication time to, hey, this is how our app works. Here's understanding how it could be attacked. But most organizations are using apps that are similar, right? Whether you're in the financial industry, the health industry, doesn't matter what you're doing. The apps are usually pretty straightforward to determine how they work and what they're doing. So usually getting started from the attack side, really all I'm looking for is credentials and a URL is pretty much it. Some places will look for a lot more. They'll ask for things like, hey, do you have file upload? Do you have this? Do you have that? I'll find all that when I get in there. And when I do get in there, I'll start asking questions if I don't see stuff that's there. Now, a lot of people ask why credentials. You're supposed to be mimicking an attacker, so why do you get credentials into the app? That's kind of cheating the system. Well, the thing to remember about a pen test is, one, a lot of attacks occur from people that have accounts. whether that's self-registered accounts, whether that's accounts that have been given, but there's a lot of attacks that occur due to somebody having an account already, especially when you see these, oh, I can see somebody else's information. We've seen this in the past. You change an account number on the URL, and now all of a sudden you can see, somebody else's account on there. Well, if you don't give me credentials into the app, how am I supposed to test that for you to find out? Basically, if you don't give me credentials, I'm going to do my recon, and I'm going to try to see if I can find a way to break in, and I'm going to test the login page. But if your login is good and your forgot password is good and they're really difficult to bypass, then you've paid for an assessment of your login page. And that's not really useful for what you're trying to do. You're trying to understand the security of your app. So we ask for credentials. Also because it's a limited time frame. We don't have a year to do a pen test for an application. Usually we get a week, or I often push for 3 to 4 weeks to do an app pen test, to give a little extra time for being able to think about the app, really understand how it works, but also work with you as we're going through the process and say, hey, we found this. Do you want to take a look at it? Do you want to maybe try to resolve it? I just had a test we were doing where somebody was actually able to resolve issues while we were doing the test, to be able to have me recheck them to validate that the fix that they put in place actually worked. So there's lots of things that we can do around being prepared within our application. And the first thing we need to understand is we have to have credentials. We have to have the apps. If it's mobile apps, how are you going to deploy the app to the person doing the assessment? Do you use something like Hockey app? Do you have something like that if you're deploying in a lower level environment, is it the production app that we're testing? Do you have the credentials ready? Are you ready on your side to be able to do the test? I can't tell you how many times we get ready to do a test and then, the app's not ready. Sorry, we can't do this yet. We got to wait. Something's come up. We can't do this. That can be difficult, right? So making sure that you're ready, when your deployment cycles are, that the application is going to be ready. It's going to be in a state that's ready to be tested. When you set up to schedule that assessment to occur, we want to be prepared for that. Things you want to look out for before you do this, don't try to change things just because you're doing a pen test, right? The goal here is not to trick the tester, right? It's not to beat the system. It's not to win the game, right? Understanding that one of our goals within a pen test is to work with them to understand they're providing us feedback on where the weaknesses are in our application. We need to be able to accept that and then determine how we want to respond to that. But if we go through and try to beat the system and say, oh, we know a test is happening this week, let's do this. We'll keep an extra close eye on our logs. We'll make these changes in our app so that way these things won't be vulnerable, or we'll turn a firewall on just because we're testing, and then we'll back it off afterwards, right? Don't try to play the game when you're having an assessment done, because these assessments are important. So we want to make sure that we're taking them seriously. We want to be involved with it, right? We want to be prepared. Who's going to be involved with the test? Is it just the security team? Are you going to have some development involved or QA involved? How are they going to be involved? How are they made aware of what's going on so that it's not some sort of blind side that comes across, and next thing you know, out of nowhere, along comes security and says, oh, hey, here, by the way, here's your 70-page report on the security of your application. Now go fix these. That's not really the best way to work with the application teams to make sure that we're dealing with this the right way. So we want to make sure that as we're getting ready to start one of these things, everybody that's involved has an understanding of what's going on, what do we expect out of this, and then, of course, the final thing we want to think about when we think about the pen test, once it's already gone through, is what do we do with those results? So we get this report, and maybe it's 5 pages, probably pretty rare, but very possible. Maybe it's 100 pages. Maybe it's 200 pages. We have all these results that we're going to deal with. And we went back and talked about the goals. We talk about goals. That's where we talk about, hey, what are we expecting out of this? What are we trying to get? Well, remember, in those goals, the goal is often not to identify every instance, but we're identifying the weaknesses. So when we get our pen test, we have to understand that its goal was not to identify every instance of cross-site scripting within your application or every instance of SQL injection within your application. Instead, that pen test was focused on saying, okay, let me see how many different risks I can identify as I'm going through trying to reach those other goals of viewing PCI data or accessing somebody else's account or whatever it may be. So as we start listing those out, we say, oh, I found insufficient authorization. Let me throw that in the report. And here's some examples or instances of that, so you can see what we're talking about where authorization was not working as we expected. Here's cross-site scripting. Let me give you some examples of where this is, right? It's that proof that says we're missing this control. This control is not working. We need to go back and resolve this. And hopefully those examples are good, right? They're easy to walk through. They take you step by step, that anybody that receives that report could go back and reproduce that same result by reading through that report. If the examples aren't that good, that makes it much more difficult for us to understand what the problem is. So then now we've got this. We understand that we've got instances. So if I go fix those 2 instances and I ask for a retest, I didn't really fix cross-site scripting. I fixed 2 instances of cross-site scripting. Maybe not the whole thing. Okay, so we have to understand that about pen tests. And I know everybody wants a retest so they can show they cleared everything. But keep that in mind about pen tests. It's not about clearing everything because we didn't list all the instances. So what we want to do is we want to do analysis after the pen test. We want to understand those results. So I've got cross-site scripting. Let me go figure out what it is about that. Is there anything systematic about the cross-site scripting that we have? Is there anything that we can tell that, wow, we're using this object? .NET as an example, we use response.write and we don't encode any of our output. And we know we do that. So let's take that and say, okay, let's scan our code base. Any place where there's response.write, let's make sure that we're outputting coding to make sure we're protecting against cross-site scripting. Maybe there's a couple other techniques that we're using that's making us vulnerable. Maybe we're using a label control. Maybe our view engine has a weakness in a certain way that we do something and we're doing it that way. Take that and then go back and try to resolve that issue system-wide, not just focusing on, hey, I've got this one flaw, I'm going to go patch it, and then we're done. Cross-site scripting's over. Because what's going to happen is next time we go do the test, we're just going to identify 3 or 4 more instances that were already there that you just ignored on the rebound, and you're going to have this false sense of security that you've fixed cross-site scripting within your app when you really haven't. It's still there. And a lot of this, for me, comes down to we lack doing the analysis of the results that come back. And instead, we just list them off as individual bugs. We throw them over the fence to the development team and we say, hey, fix these and we'll get them retested. But we don't go that extra distance to say, hey, let's actually analyze this. Why do we have these? Let's go back, look through our app, and see if we can find this anyplace else. Another good example of this is like cross-site request forgery. Something that will identify it and say, hey, it's vulnerable on these 3 pages because these are important pages. But it's also vulnerable every place else. But you see people come back and they're like, all right, well, I'll fix it on those 3 pages because that's what you identified. And we don't want to overlook that portion of the results of a penetration test because that's where we're getting the gold. That's where we're getting the information that we need, that we can take that and go back and do this. And most of us in the application security role, we are analysts. So we should have the ability to go in and see the source code if we need to, but to be able to take these results and start to figure out, hey, why do we have these flaws? Why do I have cross-site scripting in my app? Shouldn't we have controls for this? Where are we breaking down? Go look at our training. What did our training do? Did we figure out any way within our training system that we're teaching cross-site scripting and understanding how to mitigate cross-site scripting? And if we go look at the flaw that we have sitting out there right now that's been identified within this pen test report, does that flaw fit within what our training has provided? Maybe our training is lacking. It's okay if it is. Hopefully we have some sort of training going on. But if it's not, we can hopefully implement some training that are there. If we have the training going on and it's just missed in the training, well, then that gives us another training opportunity, something smaller. Let's do a simple lunch and learn and figure out, hey, this is where we missed this. Let's make sure we make everybody aware that in this situation, We could be vulnerable, so we want to keep an eye out for this. And here's how we can protect against that. If the training exists and it covers it and we still had the problem, well, we've got to look at other reasons why we still have the problem. We've been trained on it, so why are we not doing it? Was this code that was written before we got trained on it? Was it code that was written after we got trained on it? Are there other steps that we could take to help identify this? Did the QA process fail us? Is there a way that QA could have identified this type of flaw? Do we have static analysis running that could have identified this, or dynamic analysis that could have identified this? There are lots of means to be able to identify a lot of these flaws. You know, you go look, we do dynamic analysis on our applications, and we get tons of stuff back. And you do a pen test, and half that stuff is on that. So if you're doing some of this other stuff, when you get the pen test report, hopefully it shouldn't be too big of a surprise. One of the big differences between those tools and, of course, the pen test is hopefully your pen test has a lot of manual assessment portion to it. A lot of times, right, we do DAS, we do SAS. These are all automated. They're good at finding certain things. A good penetration test is oftentimes very manual. It's walking through the app. It's figuring out how does it work and how can I trick it? How can I beat this application? That's what I'm trying to do with that pen test. So it's not just a run a scanner and give you the results. If you're doing that, that's really more of an assessment. It's a vulnerability assessment being sold as a pen test. Hopefully your pen test is much more manual. It's got a very heavy manual side to be able to go through and assess the business functionality, the logic within that application, and to be able to look at it and use human intelligence to be able to determine, hey, could I do something here? Could I not do something here? There may be a time where we can automate more of it, but there's still a lot of stuff that at this point really isn't automated and needs that kind of human touch to it to go through and assess that data and be able to make those decisions and determination to find out, hey, is this really what we need to be doing? And how can we protect our apps as we go through this? So kind of a quick overview of what pen testing is, some of our goals that we're looking at doing it, and kind of how to analyze those results. But if you want more information on this, please feel free, reach out. This is what I do. This is my focus is application security. I do a lot of pen testing, but I also do a lot of advising and helping organizations be able to make their processes more efficient, and what can we get more out of this. And to me, pen tests, they're a great tool. I don't think they're the end-all be-all of application security. One, they come way at the end. They're the last thing you do before you deploy. And I'd much rather see us doing security stuff beforehand. They're a verification to make sure that we have implemented the controls we thought we implemented. So when we get those results, we can take those and then look back at the controls we think were implemented and find out why are these not implemented as we expected. And we can start building those in. So the next time you have your tools run, or the next time you have a pen test run, you're not falling victim to these type of vulnerabilities because we're working that back into that process. So if you want any more information, please reach out, contact me, james@developsec.com. Always happy to have conversations with people talking about this stuff. I'm actually getting ready to launch a course that I'm doing. It's a 6-week course talking about and teaching really developers, QA on application security, and it's teaching, I hate to say the word fundamentals, but it's the concepts what we're talking about. So when we talk about injection, we talk about why injection works, what it does. And then we look at a few examples of what injection is, but then we talk about, hey, this is the reason why it works. Here's how we can start protecting against it. And here's what you can start doing to help moving forward within your organization. So I'm actually going to send a survey out shortly after this to be able to get some ideas on people, like what type of format, timeline, that type of thing. But again, it's a 6-week course, 6-session course that are 1.5 to 2 hours each session. So far it's been run privately through separate clients, and it's worked really well. And I want to open that up and make it available. So keep your eye out for the survey that's going to come for that. And please provide your feedback, any thoughts you have on it. I want to make sure that I'm providing the content that makes sense and that will help you get better at what you're trying to do from an application security perspective, whether that's you're on the testing side or you're on the AppSec role side, or whether you're on the development side, the QA side, the BA side, trying to embed this stuff in. And that's what the focus of the course is trying to make sure that developers and QA and the application development team are aware of some of the security items and how they fit into that and how they can start embedding security into their processes without a lot of overhead. So keep an eye out for that. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Send your feedback at DevelopSec on Twitter, and we'll catch you on the next episode.